Kia ora.
Tomo mai e te ari ki whakataka pōkai, arahina tō pōkai tara ki te whare o te aroha. Kia miri miri a koe te arau o te aroha. O Ngāti whātua e tau nei.
A whiti ora ki te whai ao, ki te ao mārama. A whiti ki runga, a whiti ki raro, e ngungu ki te kohatu, e ngungu ki te rākoi. Titaha ki tēnei taha, titaha ki tērā taha. Hei a te ata pūa o te ata ka ata hāpara te ata. Ko koro ki te manu, ko kore hi te manu, a ka wairori te ngutu. Ko te ata nui, ko te ata roa, ko te ata kāhora noa. Ki uta, ki tai, ki uta. Hākiri kau ake te taringa, a ka rongo kau no ake i te oro to wao tapu nui, kua ao, kua Aotearoa. A ti hei mauri ora. A tēnei te tuku, te karakia mo te ata nei, wai hoki ki te mihi ki a koe e te Premier e Jacinda tēnā koe. O ti rā ngā minita o te kāwanatanga, nau mai hara mai ki tēnei whenua o Ngāti Whātua rākei. Nau mai hara mai ki te karanga o te rā tuarua, nō reira tēnei te mihi, kai aku nui, kai aku rahi. Ki tēnei kaupapa whakahirehira, he whenua tauri kura. Nō reira nau mai, haere mai, nau mai hara mai, tēnā tātou.
Morena, atamari everyone, welcome back. Nau mai hoki mai, auraki mai, whakaopeti mai ki tā tātou hui he whenua tauri kura countering terrorism and violent extremism. E te minita, e te Premier, Prime Minister, Minister Little, and your kāhui, your whānau mai te whare pāremata, nau mai, welcome. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to everyone for returning on day 2 of our conference. It must have been a great day yesterday because you're back again today. So give yourselves a round of applause. Let's warm up the whare. I do have a couple of housekeeping guidelines just to quickly run over. I won't go through the full extent of it. Don't want to bore you too quickly, too early in the day. But just a reminder that there are first aid facilities, a wellness area, and a dedicated prayer area for those of you who wish to utilise those facilities. We also have Dylan, Andrea, Liam, our illustrators over there in the corner, who are capturing each of the sessions in illustration form, and you can go over, and engage with the boards and with the artists themselves and provide some feedback or some guidelines for them so that they can whakatutuki a rātou mahi, achieve what they are here to do. Also, the security, as you know, you would have been familiar with that by now. Security, if you leave the premises, you will have to come back through those security screening processes. The apps, please keep utilising the apps throughout the sessions today. That's where you can have your voice heard or your opinions read and duly noted by the organisers, who will take that feedback away, those discussions, and implement it into hopefully a plan of action moving forward from this year's conference. So I also want to welcome those of us who have joined us on day 2 who may have not attended yesterday's conference sessions as well as last night's dinner. Thank you to everyone who showed up last night and had a kai tahi, a kōrero tahi, and a bit of a kata last night. It was yummy kai down at Aotearoa Centre, e mihi ana ki ngā ringa wera o tērā whare. Mihi ana hoki ki ngā ringa wera o tēnei whare. I'm giving props to the cooks, because in te ao Māori, you don't have a hui unless you have a tari o te ora, and that is the kitchen. So it's really important to give thanks and our gratitude to those of us who are toiling away in the kitchen, preparing our healthy kai for us, so that it sustains us moving forward throughout this day. It is a jam-packed day, another one. So I hope you have had a good rest overnight. That is pretty much the summary of all the housekeeping rules. You do know, of course, in the event of an emergency, please follow the staff members who are all wearing blue lanyards with event staff written on them, or security, or the police if you need assistance in that department. Atu I tērā, e tino mihi ana ki a tātou. I also want to welcome and acknowledge our communities who have joined us at this year's conference, including our rainbow community, our uenuku whānau, and our disability whānau who are here amongst us. So I also want to give big props to, I got paid last night to say that, no. I also want to give a big mihi to our rangatahi in the room who have, of course, taken the initiative, and that's what I love about rangatahi, They do what's right for them. And in this room, we do have actually a group of rangatahi youth, and they've amalgamated themselves, they've congregated across the table, and I say, that's mana motuhake right there. You claim it as a collective, you know, as a collective, ki te kotahi te kākaho ka whatsi, ki te kāpuia e kore e whatsi. One reed alone can snap easily, but if you combine all the reeds together, you're a strong collective. Very hard to push down. So, mihi ana ki ngā rangatahi o tō tātou whare, tēnā koutou katoa. Now, our first guest speaker to the stage, I am so honoured to be able to introduce her to the stage. I won't take long because you know who she is. But she has just recently been on a bit of an intrepid journey to the coldest place on earth. I will say that out loud with pride. But she has been on a learning expedition in Antarctica. And so I'd love for us all to help keep her warm in this warm whare and embrace her with aroha, with a sound round of applause. Ho mai te pakipaki te Premier o Aotearoa, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, i te tuatahi kei te mihi atu ahau ki te mana whenua Ngāti whātua o rākei. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia koutou katoa i manaaki nei i tēnei kaupapa, i kore nei i mimiti te puna o maiaha. He oti anō, tuia te kāwea, tairanga ake te kāwea, ko te kāwe oi, ko te kāwe o te whenua tauri kura. Tēnā tātou katoa. Te lauwhalawa, shalom, assalamu alaikum. My greetings to Ngāti Whātua o Rākei. Thank you for welcoming us, hosting us, and helping us with this important discussion on countering terrorism and violent extremism. I see here today representatives from our communities, academia, members of civil society, and those from the private sector, NGOs, and the public sector. I see old friends. I acknowledge Minister Andrew Little, the lead coordination minister of the Royal Commission and minister of the NZSIS and GCSB, and Minister Priyanka Radhakrishnan, our Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Ethnic Communities. Most importantly of all, we remember the 51 shuhada from the March 15 attack and acknowledge survivors, along with their families and loved ones, and all those who have suffered the consequences of violent extremism or terrorism. You are why we are here today. I'm also pleased to be here in person this year. After, some of you may recall, the fog kept me relegated to a screen last year, and I look forward to attending some of the important sessions that follow today. The goal of this second Countering Terrorism and Violent Extremism hui is to pursue a safer Aotearoa New Zealand with a focus on prevention. And that, of course, takes all of us. And not just everyone in this room, but the 5 million Kiwis outside of this room too. And so today I want to use this opportunity to speak openly about the national security threats facing New Zealand and what we must do about them. But I also want to be very specific about what New Zealanders have told us, about what worries them, their views on our ability to act, and what more they need in order to play their part too. Put simply, New Zealanders need to know more about the current and emerging threats to our national security, because ultimately we all have a role to play in preventing the worst, and being open about our risks is an important part of that. So let's dive straight in. Today, national security agencies released a draft National Security Long-Term Insights briefing. the first of its kind in New Zealand. These briefings are prepared independently by agencies and are intended to help us plan not just for the next few years, but into the future. It looks into the most significant threats New Zealanders are concerned about for the next decade, as well as the work we are doing to combat or prepare for those risks. First of all, it highlights 4 key global trends that impact our national security. 1, increasing competition between countries and the deterioration of the rules-based order. To bring that closer to home, it's undeniable that we feel the effects of geopolitical tensions. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has rippling social and economic impacts, and we've seen that cause a spike in everything from fuel prices, food insecurity, and it's brought to the fore the threat of escalation or copycat action. Number 2, technology change that is impacting all aspects of life, creating benefits but also new risks. Technology can bring us close together, but it also gives new means by which those who wish to do us harm can spread extreme views and disinformation. For example, recent analysis by Microsoft reports that New Zealanders were subject to a spike in exposure to Russian disinformation or propaganda online after December 2021. Much of this related to COVID-19. This spike preceded an increase in protests against COVID-19 measures and other issues in New Zealand. Number 3, the impact of climate change on the world's natural resources and its role in more severe weather events. For New Zealand, that hits home on top of a significant threat of natural disaster. And 4, the ongoing economic, social and political effect of COVID-19 in any future pandemics. Now, none of this will surprise New Zealanders. In fact, we care deeply about all of those issues. But part of the long-term insights briefing was a public perception survey, which provides us a representative view of the things that are worrying New Zealanders the most and their views on how well equipped we are to manage those risks. Now, there are a couple of things that stood out to me that I wanted to share with you today. Just 1 in 5 believe our security agencies share enough information about national security. We learned that 4 out of 5 people are concerned about a number of threats touching their own lives in the next 12 months. Now, this dispels a myth that New Zealanders believe we are immune to national security threats or that we're somehow not important enough to be targeted or the subject of harmful activity. It also tells us that New Zealanders are fully aware of the full range of risks we face. In fact, here are the top 5 threats of most concern to New Zealanders over the next 12 months. National disaster, misinformation, hacking, another major health epidemic, and organised crime. People have said their confidence in government agencies' ability to protect or respond to threats is highest for natural disasters and terrorist attacks, and lowest for misinformation and nuclear, chemical or biological attacks. And there's likely to be an explanation for that, which we can see in the survey itself. 87% of New Zealanders are worried about the threat of natural disaster, which is not surprising given we are one of the most natural disaster-prone countries in the world. This year in particular, New Zealanders have been affected by flooding across the country. But New Zealanders have also said this is a threat they feel most prepared for and have confidence in the government to manage, alongside terrorist attacks. We've proven that when disaster strikes, we can move quickly and decisively to help people, and we have integrated and coordinated systems through civil defence ready to go, and strong public advice on how to prepare. At a local level, people see their libraries carry emergency water tanks, for instance, or emergency packs under desks at work. Just last week, we had the annual shakeout where our Emergency Management Minister, Kieran McAnulty, joined students in Nelson for the drill. We have well-known resources like getready.gov.nz where people can go for information to get their homes, workplaces and schools ready. We also heard that 81% of people concerned about the threat posed by a health epidemic, which again is not surprising given we're still deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, however, New Zealanders said they felt mostly prepared for health epidemics and more confident about the government's ability to protect and respond to that challenge. And I really do put pay, and that demonstrates as testament to the work of everyone from CDAM groups, NEMA and the Ministry of Health. Natural disasters and pandemics are most certainly on our minds, but as you've seen, they are things that people feel relatively well prepared for. can we say the same of all of our national security challenges? Over 80% of people said they're worried about the threat from mis- and disinformation, hacking, transnational organised crime. We increasingly see these threats impacting our communities and our businesses. In fact, 1 in 4 people felt that mis- and disinformation was the greatest threat to them and their families. We're particularly concerned about the challenge of disinformation as we see this exacerbating a number of national security issues. It's impacting liberal democracies worldwide, eroding trust in institutions, and our ability to respond to it as a society is being tested. This is an area too that is ill-defined, and so naturally people are less certain about what the government is doing or can do to protect people, and what more they can do to prepare and protect themselves. Greater efforts are needed to detect disinformation campaigns and networks and disrupt them, or calling out those that sponsor this activity. We are committed to working with communities, media, academia, civil society, the private sector, especially our social media platforms, to counter the threat of disinformation. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, including the Christchurch call, a little later in my speech. On hacking, we've seen the stark impact that cyber incidents can have on our infrastructure, such as the Waikato DHB, where critical hospital computer systems and phone lines were taken down, affecting services. Cyber threats are a global issue, and our ability to address them requires international cooperation in agreeing on responsible online behaviour. On the front line, we have government agencies and groups working together to provide public information on how to keep ourselves, our families, and of course businesses safe online. The National Cyber Security Centre, CERT-NZ, the New Zealand Police and NetSafe all work together to provide public reporting and advice. Rounding off this list, and finally on those list of threats, New Zealanders are concerned about transnational organised crime operating in and through New Zealand, causing harm to our communities and businesses. Recent investigations have demonstrated how organised crime groups in New Zealand are actively growing their connections to offshore transnational crime networks and exploiting vulnerable communities to increase demand for illicit commodities. Our efforts to respond to organised crime include anti-money laundering, asset recovery through intelligence sharing, working with international partners to prevent, detect and deter organised crime. To counter this threat, we're also working more across maritime security, cyber security and emerging technologies, border security, and we're working with our partners in the Pacific. Finally, I want to say this again. One very clear message we've heard is that people want us to talk and share more about national security, that knowing more about the threats we face actually makes people feel more confident in our ability to respond to them. And that holds true when it comes to the threat of terrorism. We were forever changed on the 15th of March 2019. A further attack in September 2021, where 8 people were stabbed in a supermarket in the Auckland suburb of New Lynn by a violent extremist, further reinforced that terrorism and violent extremism is an active risk in New Zealand. People can radicalise to violence when they come to see violence as a feasible tool to address their grievances and amplify their hate. Now, there must always be space for radical ideas. These are valued and vital in Aotearoa, New Zealand, as a free, open, democratic and progressive society. However, when dehumanising and hateful ideas are part of ideologies that include hate and intolerance towards specific groups or communities, promoting or enabling violence, these may indicate a path towards violent extremism. So what can we do? I want to speak about 4 key areas of work that will help to prevent violent extremism in New Zealand. Research is a vital area of importance in the prevention space. This year, we launched Te Whenua Taurikura, New Zealand's National Centre of Research Excellence for Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism. The centre is in response to Recommendation 14 of the Royal Commission of Inquiry and is being set up to be independent of government, which was really important to us, with its own governance board and led by directors Professor Joanna Kidman and Distinguished Professor Paul Spoonley. The centre brings together research organisations, institutes, civil society organisations and government to research preventing and countering violent extremism with a focus on understanding diversity and promoting social cohesion. This New Zealand-specific research will play an essential role in informing our national approaches. I'd like to acknowledge the inaugural Master's Scholarship recipients who are, of course, affiliated with the Centre, who are here today. It is your work and that of those who will follow you that will shape policies of the future. Our second key area of work is in the online environment. The internet connects us together in an ever-growing exchange of ideas, information, and indeed, sadly, in some cases, disinformation and violence. As we are now so wholly dependent on the internet, New Zealand continues to champion it as a force for good, advancing social and economic well-being of individuals and communities and forging positive connections. But the connections go both ways. As we all know, the Christchurch attacks reflected an evolution in terrorism and violent extremism, as the attacker connected through online platforms with others who were radicalised to hateful views and violence. The attacks were in turn amplified via live stream and proliferated around the world in the days, weeks and months following. Nearly 3.5 years on from its establishment, the Christchurch Call remains at the forefront of global efforts to eliminate terrorist and violent extremist content online. The call is underpinned by the principles of a free, open and secure internet, with human rights and fundamental freedoms at the core. More than 120 governments, online service providers and civil society organisations have pledged support to the call's commitments. And I want to acknowledge those in the room who have worked so tirelessly over the past 3.5 years to contribute to the work of the Christchurch Call. It is making a difference. Among other things, we have achieved an increase in transparency of online service providers, a stronger understanding of algorithm challenges, and strengthened the interoperable crisis response system. Yet there is much more to do. Just over a month ago, I met with Christchurch Call leaders from governments, tech companies and civil society. I can tell you New Zealand was well represented at that meeting in New York. It was clear to me that leaders in the community hold an ongoing deep belief in the mission of the call, and they are more motivated and determined than ever to build on its progress, particularly as we encounter a changing online and societal landscape. We agreed to further work over the coming years to address the online service providers that remain outside of the call community. We will launch work to support the safe and secure adoption of new technologies which will change online experience and, unfortunately, likely change the landscape of terrorism and violent extremism. In this work, we must consider youth and children as some of the most vulnerable users of new technologies. We'll also work on gender-based aspects of terrorist and violent extremist content online. And we'll advance our work towards responsible algorithms. In fact, we've already begun work to better understand algorithms with the launch of the Christchurch Call initiative on algorithmic outcomes. This initiative empowers independent researchers to understand the algorithms we interact with and which underpin our online experiences. Now, studying these impacts won't be easy. We need to be mindful of privacy and proprietary information, and the initiative aims to address these issues and provide the research we so desperately need. We must make progress in this area so we can build effective interventions to protect and empower people with choices, both online and offline. Now, the third area of work I want to highlight today is the development of our strategic framework for preventing and countering violent extremism, which includes solutions and approaches developed by society for society. The Royal Commission identified gaps in our system and recommended that as we develop our strategies for countering terrorism, we include a range of sectors, not just government agencies, in developing our approach. Radicalisation to violence is highly individualised. There is no single model to explain why people choose to mobilise to violence. Because of this, a broad program of initiatives is required across a range of prevention and countering spectrum areas. But there are 4 thematic outcomes. Individuals that are down or heading down a path of radicalisation to violence are supported from further harm. Messages of hate and intolerance that promote violent extremism are countered. A safer online environment, mitigating risks of radicalisation, and enhance awareness and understanding of radicalisation and extremism. I want to recognise a huge amount of time, energy and ideas, as well as constructive feedback many of you here today have provided through this process of development. The prevention framework is set to be released at the end of the year, and alongside the framework we've approved budget funding of $3.8 million for the Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism Strategic Fund. The fund over 3 years will provide grants to civil society and community organisations to support them to deliver initiatives for building resilience to violent extremism and radicalisation. Of course, one of the most important ways we can prevent terrorism and violent extremism is by being a cohesive nation, where people feel they belong, where all cultures are respected and celebrated, and where everyone can participate in and contribute to social and community activities. Aotearoa New Zealand has relatively high levels of social cohesion, but we don't want to take that for granted. There is more work to do, which Minister Radhikrishnan spoke about yesterday. Talking about national security can be tricky, but it's something we need to do more often. I'm committed to a public conversation on national security and to advancing this conversation over the next months as we continue to make progress on implementing the Royal Commission's recommendation. This includes developing our national security strategy, which will embed this work for years to come. This conversation on our collective national security requires trust in others without seeing all the evidence. It requires courage to face serious issues rather than living in fear. It requires openness and compassion instead of suspicion and self-interest. I believe we can and we must do this together. I want to thank you again for being part of this incredibly important event and conversation, and thank you for having me in your sessions today. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.